Okay, without further ado, Dr. Rand Paul joining us from Kentucky. And he's going to be traveling around the country soon. We're syndicated nationwide and now on XM, so folks everywhere should go to these fundraisers he's going to be having. Rand Paul, great to have you here, sir.
Good to be with you, Alex.
Very exciting times. Before we get into your campaign, and are you going to be running for the Senate? And looks like you are. So, but before we do that, your dad, tell us about how he's doing, about the, 120-something sponsors now to audit the Fed. I mean, liberty is on the march.
I think the audit the Fed bill is really, really exciting, and it's a real example of how our movement is not just a protest movement anymore, that we're actually going to get something done in Congress, hopefully. Actually, over 160 co-sponsors now. It's virtually guaranteed that it will get a vote in committee. They haven't scheduled the committee meeting yet, but Barney Frank is the chairman of the committee, and he's agreed to hold hearings. And what I've heard is that if it passes in committee, there's a very good chance it can pass on the floor. And this is a good first step towards opening the transparency of what goes on at the Federal Reserve. What's amazing is they've increased their balance sheet or their asset sheet by $2 trillion. You know, we talk and complain about the $1 trillion stimulus and the $1 trillion bank bailout. The Federal Reserve increased their asset sheet by $2 trillion, and nobody got to vote on it, and nobody even gets to know where the money's spent. So it's about time we opened up the books of the Fed.
It certainly is. A lot of people said, oh, look, Ron Paul lost. What a waste. And I said, wait a minute. Revolutions always take time. The number one, new movement on campuses starting to overshadow the phony liberals and phony conservatives is the libertarian Ron Paul patriot movement. He was just a focal point of that. All this investment in time and energy is just going to continue to grow. And now everybody has seen that and are more heartened than ever and have learned the lesson that this isn't going to be instant gratification. This is like planting crops. A lot of work comes into it, but before you know, you're bringing in that harvest. And it's going to be the same with your Senate campaign. And I pray, just like we pushed your dad to run for president, I pray that you will, after you're done exploring this, do it. Because it's so important to just launch more torpedoes at the enemy. And I see you as a very important torpedo, not just because of your father's name, but your great education, your patriotic stance, your activities in Kentucky, your history of liberty. I think you're the man for the job, and you're a weapon we need to use against the New World Order.
Well, the amazing thing about my father's loss, and I was very involved with the campaign, and I heard some of the dissatisfaction from people, but I try to convince people that the amazing thing about the loss is that he is routinely on the mainstream media now. Our viewpoint, finally, for the first time in probably 30 years, we have a spokesman.
Yes.
They may not be listening to him all the time in Washington, but we have someone who presents our point of view to a large audience on a national basis, and he became a national leader. And there's something quirky about the media in the sense that you can be a regional person, a congressional candidate, or congressman, but then when you take that next step up to the national level, all of a sudden everybody wants to know your opinion. The other thing that's made him very prescient is the fact that he predicted the housing bubble just exactly in 2003 in committee, saying there will be this housing bubble. Not only will mortgages fail, but banks will fail because of this. And now that's being repeated verbatim. Tom Woods put it in his book. Joe Scarborough's putting it verbatim in a book that he's publishing. So people are taking notice of the fact that he predicted what was going to happen with this housing bubble.
Exactly. We have a bandwagon effect. You have the Republican Party that sold out to the New World Order totally in shambles, and they're recognizing the only thing left and growing is true conservatism, true libertarian viewpoint. And I've got to say this, your father's very scholarly. He had a lot more fire and was more passionate when he was, 30 years ago giving speeches that have been since put up on YouTube. And he's very humble, so he didn't, like to get aggressive and, really show a lot of fire in the belly until he got attacked. And we saw more of that. And now he's gotten very comfortable on TV. Now he's on national TV almost every day. And he is, as you said, we're forcing the American people's popular viewpoint now into the mainstream. They're having to capitulate and admit that we are a massive minority becoming a majority. And this is an incredible victory. And that goes to you, your father, to everybody that supported Ron Paul, to people who have fought for liberty for decades in this nation. We're having huge success. And I want listeners to understand that the establishment has tried to send people into our midst to be naysayers and to nitpick and ninny. Those people, a lot of them are just closed-minded, but a lot of them are operatives.
Right, and you mentioned going beyond sort of the right-left paradigm. This is what I tell people about if I can win a primary and get into a general election, is that I don't think you have to sell your message out and just become a Democrat when you win the primary to attract Democrats. I think there's a whole host of independents and people who might even call themselves moderate who think the deficit is drowning us and we have to do something about it. But you know the reason they're not voting Republican is because they don't trust the Republicans anymore to do anything about it. So we have to bring back some believability. You know, as I'm going to be running as a Republican, we need to bring back believability to the Republicans and say we do believe in in reducing the deficit and cutting spending and doing the things that we talked about for many years but never did once we got in power.
And it's not just you running. We need a lot more people to run. They are running, people for county commissioner, dog catcher, mayor, sheriff, state representatives on the liberty bandwagon, and that's why we see 30-plus states moving to declare 10th and 9th Amendment sovereignty. That's why we see resolutions defending the Second Amendment and declaring state sovereignty on the Second Amendment being declared. I mean, we're actually counter-striking the globalists that are trying to take over our nation on every front, aren't we, Dr. Paul?
Well, and I think 2010 could be a big year because just historically there's a backlash a lot of times against presidents. The other thing is this president is going so far in the direction of direct government ownership of banks, direct government ownership of the auto companies, that I think there will be a backlash, and it could be a good year. And people ask me if I did win the nomination, what would I say about the Democrat opponents is I really think they're going to have to defend Obama, and it can be a campaign about President Obama in 2010. And while he does have high popularity rolls, in Kentucky, he lost overwhelmingly to John McCain, and John McCain ran sort of a lackluster campaign, but he still wiped out President Obama in Kentucky. So Kentucky is rife, I think, for talking about the fact that we can't go along this road. We cannot continue to sustain this massive deficit.
90% chance you're going to run? I mean, what do you need to see in your exploratory committee to ensure that you do run?
There's a couple of things going on. It's kind of a tricky situation. We have an incumbent senator, Jim Bunning, who actually did vote against the bank bailout and has been fairly conservative. He unfortunately did vote for some other things that we have a great disagreement with, such as the Patriot Act, but he in general was kind of conservative. He says he's running, but at the same time he says if he doesn't raise enough money, he won't run. He also has encouraged another candidate other than myself to form an exploratory committee, which doesn't seem to make sense because if he's really running, why would he encourage other people to compete with him for fundraising if that's the key criteria for him to keep running?
Well, I don't care if he's got a half good, Dr. Paul, to interrupt here, I don't care if he's got a few good things on his record. A bunch of it's bad. Your dad isn't going to live forever. We need to use the Paul name for liberty. And we need you to go ahead and get into politics and go ahead and start winning to follow in your father's footsteps.
And I think that's sort of the question, and some of it will be shown by what we can raise through the exploratory committee. I was telling you earlier, we plan on going to several different states. I'm working on coming to Texas in August, and we're hoping to actually get down in your neck of woods to Austin. And we know we have a lot of friends in the Austin area. The Austin area was one of the biggest meetup groups in the country, and we hope that the people of Texas will try to get us a new U.S. Senator in Kentucky.
The power of having a Paul in the House and a Paul in the Senate. And for folks that want to know your policies, your ideas, I've read your writings. I know your history with the Kentucky Taxpayers Association and what you've done. You're basically what I would call a chip off the old block. Your policies are basically identical to your father, correct?
I'd say we'd be very, very similar. We might present the message sometimes differently. You know, we have a website if people want to learn more about what I think, randpaul2010.com. And on that website, we already have a lot of policy issues, and a lot of them are very, very similar to my father. I will be my own person, and I think the message in some ways has to be broadened and made more appealing to the entire Republican electorate because you have to win a primary. And not only that, it's, as I do believe, in a slightly different presentation. For example, on national defense, my father and I agree completely that you should declare war. You know, you should not fight war without declaring it constitutionally. But at the same time, I think it's important that we emphasize that the Constitution, one of the primary enumerated powers of the Constitution, was national defense. And so we do believe in a strong national defense. We just have to define what is in our best national defense. But once we do so, we need to appear and acknowledge that we do believe in a military response to those who attack us.
Sure. I mean, that's just a popular thing. But obviously you would try to repeal the Patriot Act. You try to repeal unconstitutional gun laws. You try to defend the borders.
Yeah, and in fact, one of the things that I spoke recently at the Knob Creek machine gun shootout in Kentucky, a pretty amazing thing. Over 3,000 people show up at this machine gun shootout, and I gave a speech there, and I said, look, I'm a great defender of the Second Amendment, but you know what? If you want the Second Amendment, you got to defend the First Amendment also.